All right, once again, a warm welcome to our Cloud Appreciation Series webinar on scaling your businesses through application modernization, organized by SG Tech in partnership with AWS. Thank you for taking the time to join us. My name is Anuj from SG Tech, and I'll be your MC for today. Next slide, please. So just some quick housekeeping before we commence the program proper. Please note that this session will be recorded for archival and marketing purposes. Recording will be made available post-webinar on our website, sgtech.org.sg. Do keep yourself on mute throughout the webinar, except for the quiz section where there are some prizes to be won. UTF from AWS will give you more details on that shortly. Send in any questions you may have via the chat box or the Q&A function, chat box, and we will address them in the Q&A segment. So today we have an amazing lineup of speakers, as you can see here, who are very excited to share tips on how you can scale your business up successfully by modernizing your applications. Without further delay, I would like to invite SG Tech's Cloud and Data Chapter Chair, Mr. Gunarsegan Chaplain, to give the opening address. Mr. Gunnar, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Manoj. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this session. I'm Gunnar. I'm the chair for the Cloud and Data Chapter of SG Tech. As you all know, all of us have got a day job, but the whole SG Tech team tries to put together events and activities for our community of IT companies in Singapore. And the charter of the Cloud and Data Chapter is to help organizations, both IT solution providers, to move to a cloud, at the same time helping them help their customers understand the value of moving to cloud. So in line with that, today we actually have, can you go to the next slide, Manoj? Oh, sorry, let me cover it. So today we have actually running the 7th of a series of cloud activities around how organizations can move to cloud. This is done in conjunction with another chapter, the Singapore Enterprise Chapter. So we've got AWS, who has kindly agreed to join us for this session to talk about application modernization. And we have the speakers from AWS, Dennis and Ichie, to talk later. And we've got our co-SG Tech member, Anurag, from the Singapore Enterprise Chapter as well. So with that, let me hand back to the MC. Hope that every one of us will have a good session. There are great prizes at the end of the session, and we'll be hosting a Q&A at the end as well. So that if you've got other questions, please keep it coming. You can bring up the questions in the chat, but at the same time, I'll be bringing up the questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Yutie here from AWS. Pardon my voice, I have COVID, so I lost my voice a little bit. But anyway, this is a quick brief of a couple of games we have prepared for this session, right? So for the first, it's Spot the Packies. So if you're familiar with Where's Waldo or Where's Wally, we have inserted this packies throughout the entire session. So you can take a look, and at the end we have a survey form prepared. So when you key in the correct number of packages in the form, you would stand to win some Amazon vouchers from us as well, right? And the next game that we have prepared is a quiz. So after each segment, we actually have a quiz prepared, and how the session will go is actually that the quiz will be flashed and the multiple choice questions will be flashed as well. Then I'll do a countdown from 3 to 1, and the first person to raise their hands can unmute and answer the question. And once you answer the question correctly, we have Amazon vouchers prepared for you as well. So I'll just reach out to you via chat to know your details, and I'll send you the voucher through email. Yep, I hope that's clear. And I'll hand over the time back to Manoj to go through the session. Yep.
Thanks, Yutie. So for our first speaker today, we have Mr. Dennis Goh. He will be giving us an introduction into cloud transformation with AWS. Dennis has been with AWS for 2 years and has 15 years of experience in the public sector technology space. He's been working with AWS partners to help them onboard to the AWS Partner Network, build or migrate their solutions on AWS, and jointly go to market with strategic partners. He's passionate about serverless computing and advocates for serverless technologies. Mr. Dennis, over to you.
Thanks, Manoj. Hi, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. So, I'd just like to spend a bit of time, do a quick introduction to the AWS Cloud, sort of level set the knowledge, right? Make sure everyone knows more about AWS Cloud, right? So, the first question we attempt to answer is cloud computing, right? What is cloud computing and what is AWS? So, cloud computing is loosely defined as on-demand availability of computer system resources, right? You can get data, storage, computing power directly from the internet without having to manage any servers within your own data centers, right? So the AWS is just that, right? We provide that kind of service, but we also do a lot more than what the standard cloud provider offers, right? So we provide a highly reliable, scalable, low-cost infrastructure platform in the cloud that powers millions of businesses in 190 countries around the world, right? We started in 2006, over a decade of experience building and operating Amazon.com. Then we slowly realized after many Black Friday sales and many Christmas sales, right, that we've sort of developed this core competency, right, in operating and scaling massive level of servers and infrastructure, right, and data centers. So we turned it into a business. We embarked on a mission to sort of offer this capability to developers and businesses to build sophisticated, modern, scalable applications, right, without having to dabble in infrastructure itself, right? So what are the advantages of moving to the cloud, right? So the first big one is agility, right? So it lets you, the customer, spin up resources as they need them, deploying hundreds or even thousands of servers in a matter of minutes, right? Excuse me. So the next is actually cost savings, right? So most cloud conversations always end up in cost savings, and it allows customers to sort of trade your capex, your capital expenses, right, in buying servers for variable expense, right? You only pay for what you utilize, and when you don't need it anymore, you can give it right back, right? So that's where the cost savings will be. Next up is elasticity, right? Allowing you to easily scale up or scale down your resources as the business needs evolve, right? So in the past, when you operate on traditional infrastructure, you need to provision for capacity, right? You need to know what your peak level of capacity is, and then you buy the number of servers you require in order to cater to that capacity, right? But with the cloud, it allows you to scale up instantaneously. So when you need it, you provision it. When you don't need it, you can spin down the required servers and give it right back. So building on that, it really allows you to innovate faster, right? Your resources and your headcount can actually spend more time on more valuable tasks that differentiates your business and transforms your business, rather than spend time on what AWS likes to call undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? Which is managing infrastructure, rack and stack servers, and managing data centers. Last but not least, the big benefit is actually going global in minutes, right? Allowing you to scale, right? So the concept, AWS has concepts of regions, right? Which is a physical location somewhere around the world, and where we cluster data centers, right? So when your application is successful and you want to scale, deploying your applications to multiple regions is a relatively simple exercise, and it allows you to bring your application closer to your customers around the world, providing lower latency and a better experience for your customers, right? So speaking about going global, these are some of the regional regions that we have all over the world, and they, as you can see, they're spread all over, right? So, and for each of these dots that you see on screen, right, it's a region, and a region consists of at least 2 availability zones, right? So what are availability zones, you might ask? So AZ, in short, is actually a group of 1 or more data centers, right? And each AZ has its own redundant power, redundant networking, and connectivity, right? And that's how AWS provides reliability and stability, right? Resilience. Now, from those data centers, right, AWS offers a big breadth and depth of functionality, right? So these are some of the services. It's probably too small to see, but I think what we're trying to communicate here is we provide more services and features compared to any other cloud provider, right, by a large amount, right? AWS has continually expanded its services to support virtually any cloud workload, and now we have more than 270 services, right, including compute, storage, the works, right, all over, right? And we really have the greatest breadth of services as well as the deepest functionality within some of these services. Now, why do customers choose AWS, right? We have abundance of experience. We've been spent more than 14 years helping millions of customers around the world. We have global reach and high availability, right? We have 84 availability zones spanning 26 geographic regions. Security and compliance, that's job zero for us, right? It's really important, and we have over 230 plus security features to claim to, right? We are extremely customer obsessed company as well, and we take innovation very seriously. So we started with like 2 services, right? S3 and EC2, and in a matter of years, we've grown that to over 275, right? So that's and we can deliver these services at a very high performance level with very high consistency. We are also able to, we've been known to also improve TCO, not just for ourselves, but for our customers as well. We've made 115 price reductions, right, to some of our services since 2006. So we proactively transfer and return the savings that we see, right, back to our customers as well. A great amount of machine learning, 81% to be exact, runs on AWS, right? So that's a testament to our skill sets and our capabilities. And we have a great ecosystem of partners, right? More than 4,500 software listings from over 1,000 plus ISVs, right? Running on our marketplace offering that you can buy straight from our marketplace. And don't just listen to me, right? Listen to Gartner, right? Gartner has rated AWS as the cloud leader for 11, I say again, 11 consecutive years now. And it has represented AWS as having as top, right, for the ability to execute as well as completeness of vision, right? So AWS is truly thought leaders in this particular space. Right, with that, I think we have our first quiz question, Yu Jie.
Okay, yep, I'm back. So just to reiterate for those who didn't catch the instructions just now. So basically later on the question will flash, followed by the multiple choice question and multiple choice answers, right? Then I'll count down from 3, 2, 1. Then please just raise your hand, and the first person who managed to raise his or her hand, you can unmute yourself. I'll call out your name and you can unmute yourself and you can answer the question, right? I hope that's clear. Yeah. So Dennis, I think yeah. So for the first question we have prepared is, how many consecutive years has Gartner rated AWS as a cloud leader? Lower your hands first. Let me lower everyone's hands. Okay, not yet. After I count on 3, 2, 1, then you can start raising. Don't be too excited. Okay, so the multiple choice answers are 5 years, 8 years, 11 years, or 14 years. Okay, I'll count down from 3, 2, 1. Okay, don't get so excited. Everyone's very excited. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay. I think Jeannie is the first person. Jeannie?
11 years, C. Answer is
Yep, that's correct. Yep, congratulations. Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, the answer is 11 consecutive years. I think Dennis highlighted it just now during the presentation. So yeah, Jeannie, I'll just reach out to you via a personal message for your details. Yep, thank you. Dennis, back to you.
Thanks, Yu Jie. Congratulations, Jeannie. Don't worry, guys. There are more prizes that we're giving away. And so just pay attention. We'll try and emphasize some of the correct answers, right? So you get them. Right. So next up, we sort of level set already. So we will go on to the key question of the day. So what specifically is application modernization, right? So a very textbook definition from AWS is actually the refactoring of legacy technology. So we're trying to remove legacy technology by combining modern infrastructure, architecture, organizational patterns, right, all together to sort of maximize the resiliency and the engineering efficiency and the business agility of your business, right? So that, in a nutshell, is modernization. Right, so to dig into that further, right, we sort of need to talk about the cloud journey. What a typical cloud journey for a customer looks like, right? So we have a graph here that plots time on the horizontal axis and value in the vertical, right? So early in the business journey, right, early in their cloud journeys, right, businesses tend to spin up projects, right? Okay, let's do one project to see how we can take advantage of the cloud, see how the cloud works, see how cloud security works. So they're sort of getting their feet wet, getting their fingers dirty, and trying to understand cloud. Right? So after a couple of projects, they see some value in it, then they start to transition to the foundational phase, right? So what is this? The business is basically trying to see how they can scale their cloud adoption. So they're trying to set up security procedures, compliance procedures, right? They are setting up their operational models and centers of excellence in order to get ready to build more and do more on the cloud. Then they started to build more applications, and then they realize, hey, all these new applications are in the cloud. What about our legacy applications, right? So then they start to embark on migration efforts, right? Move their existing applications, including mission critical applications, into the cloud, and sometimes their entire data center footprint as well, right? So after migrations, then what they realize is they have a lot of legacy applications and data that they didn't have the effort to change. They didn't take the effort to change. That is now sitting on the cloud that is not so efficient, right? So that's what the modernization phase is about, right? It's about looking at your applications, right? Changing things slowly and changing small parts to get efficiency and get gains on the cloud, right? Allowing you to spend less while doing more on the cloud. So that sort of culminates into what we call the continuous reinvention phase, right? Where you go between continuous reinvention back to modernization, and you go back and forth, and you continuously transform your business. So this is where you really start to take advantage of the full flexibility of the cloud to gain, to speed up your time to market and to speed up the rate of innovation for your business. So migrations is a typical path. That's what most people do. However, we do see that there are some businesses who, instead of migrating applications straight to the cloud, they start looking at alternate paths, right? Which is what we call the cloud native path, right? To look at how they can transform before actually moving to the cloud, right? So, and that's what we're trying to explore today, right? How to do that. So digging into a traditional application, right? What a traditional web application looks like. You have your web application servers, you have your presentation layer, right? You have your business logic sitting in your application servers, right? And this would be APIs and business logic, batch jobs that are running on your app servers. Then you have your database servers, right? Forming your data layer. So this will be made up of maybe one or multiple databases that serve your application. Right. So the most natural thing, or the most instinctive thing to do when you move to the cloud, right, is actually to say, hey, let's see how we can replicate that environment in the cloud, right? So let's set up a 3-tier networking in the cloud, right? That spin up web servers, application servers, and DB servers using virtual machines, and then we'll just migrate from on-premise to the cloud. Yeah. So that's most typical, and sure, there are definitely some gains to be had in doing this. Maybe you gain some scalability, you gain elasticity, you can shut down servers that you don't need, and maybe there may even be some cost savings to be had already, right? But if you look at it, right, it's like for like predominantly, right? So whatever you're managing on premise, for example, your database licenses, your OS licenses, those costs carry over, right? You still need to do all those. You still need to patch servers. You still need to do security patching to make sure that your applications are not vulnerable. So all those things still have to be done if you migrate in this fashion, right? So there's clearly more benefits to be had, right? More efficiencies to be gained, right? And that sort of leads us into the migration pathways, right? What can you do to modernize, right? So one thing that you can do very clearly is sort of move to open source technologies, right? So you gain freedom from proprietary licensed software. So a good example of this is moving from a Windows OS to a Linux OS, right? So if your application can be ported to run on Linux as well, you can take advantage of Linux-based EC2s, and that would significantly already, right, reduce the cost of virtual machines significantly, right? So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you could consider is sort of moving to managed databases, right? So using fit for purpose, open source, highly scalable databases that are run by AWS, right? So this eliminates reduces the license costs incurred with databases. It eliminates the need for you to do routine database patching to keep your database software updated. And this could be something like Amazon's RDS, right? Relational Database Service, right? And you could choose Postgres as a database flavor, and you would gain all that benefits, right? While still maintaining a SQL-based transactional database, so that there's not so much heavy lifting to be done. Next up is actually moving to cloud services, right? Managed cloud services to be specific, right? So these are services that are run by AWS, and the infrastructure is managed by AWS, and you consume it sort of like a SaaS service, right? So these allow you to deploy, operate applications at scale. And one example of such a service is AWS App Runner, right? So it allows you to deploy your application, right, with no infrastructure experience whatsoever, right? AWS will take care of all the heavy lifting, put in the load balancers and the servers and the networking required, for you to run your application, right? So that's the example of what can be done. Last but not least is actually moving to cloud native architectures. So this requires a little bit more effort, a little bit of re-engineering effort. But what we're talking about here is to build agile, scalable applications, right? Running on containers, serverless, and using microservices as a baseline. Right. And this is the section that we sort of focus on today. We'll spend a bit more time digging into containers, serverless, and microservices. Right. So first up is actually containers, right? We're trying to address that. So we'll try and answer the big question, right? What are containers? Right? So containers are essentially an evolution of virtualization technology, right? So you've heard of virtualized hardware, virtual machines, and we've been used to that. And there are many vendors out there that provide this kind of virtualization. And Amazon Web Services provides that in the form of Elastic Cloud Compute. So that's EC2 for short. Right, so that's our version of virtual machines. With a virtual machine, you have an operating system, right? That's virtualized, and you're running an application on top of that operating system with your binaries and your libraries and all that within that environment. But it is still a shared environment, right? You can run multiple applications on that single virtualized hardware. Containers sort of builds on top of that, and it adds a further layer of virtualization and to OS level components. So this sort of becomes like an individual process that is isolated and running in its own environment, right? So this, in short, we call it process isolation. So in a nutshell, right, a modern container sort of becomes like a standard unit of deployment, right? Where you can take your code, you can take your dependencies and your runtime engines, put it into, for lack of a better description, a container, right? That you can then reuse to deploy into multiple deployment locations, right? Without worrying about the consistency and the underlying operating system, right? And this gives you the consistency and the ease of deployment. And that's where the gains are to be had in the containers, right? So next question is, how would you run containers on AWS, right? So we have multiple services that offer you that capability, right? And a lot of questions, very often customers ask us, how do I choose, right? So on the screen here, you see ECS, right? Elastic Container Service. So that's Amazon's flavor of running Docker containers. You have Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service, EKS, right? So that's our flavor of running Kubernetes on AWS. And to the far right, you have Red Hat OpenShift on AWS, or in short, ROSA. So that's our collaboration with Red Hat to actually produce to run OpenShift on AWS. So that's also Kubernetes flavor. We'll dig into that a little bit more, but across the board, all these services are managed services, and they're all managed and run by AWS, and they all provide a very deep integration with other AWS services, and they all allow you to scale reliably across the world, right? So how are they different? Let's dig into that a little bit more. So ECS container service allows you to deploy Docker containers, and whether is it a single Docker container or you're deploying multiple application portfolios, right, across your whole enterprise, and it allows you to run and scale your container workloads across availability zones in the cloud, and even on-premise, right, without the complexity of having to manage a control plane on nodes, right? So ECS supports Docker containers specifically, and applications packaged locally as a container will deploy and run on ECS without need for any further configuration changes, right? So if it runs on your developers' machines, it will run on ECS. Right, so again, it's a fully managed container orchestration service. AWS handles the configurations, the operational best practices built in into the control plane and the nodes and the add-ons, right? So you don't have to worry about that whole management layer, right? When you deploy it, you choose which availability zones you're deploying your applications into, and Amazon takes care of the rest, right? So that's ECS in short. Right. EKS, on the other hand, is again a managed service, but with the Kubernetes mix, right? So if your team is already familiar with Kubernetes and knows how to run Kubernetes, this will be a pretty natural choice, right? So EKS is Kubernetes conformant, so we're certified, and it will run on upstream Kubernetes flavors, right? So it lets you run your applications on both Elastic Cloud Compute as well as AWS Fargate, so you have some options as to the underlying compute and where they are deployed. Again, it's very tightly integrated with the AWS networking, security services like application load balancer, identity and access management, and VPCs, right, for pod networking. So what does EKS actually do, right? So we offer Kubernetes as a service, as we like to call it, right? It offers the reliability and the uptime that's expected of an AWS service. How do we do that? We essentially manage the entire control plane, right? So meaning your configurations, your master node, these are all abstracted from you and you don't have to think about master configuration at all, right? We continuously monitor your control plane, your matrices, the performance of it, and we scale up and down as necessary, right? So we essentially choose the right instance for your use case and we scale that instance as required when your use case starts to scale. Right? Last but not least is a Red Hat OpenShift on AWS, right? In short, we call it ROSA, right? It provides a integrated experience to use OpenShift. Right, so if your applications have already been built on OpenShift, this again is the natural choice, right? So it allows you to accelerate your application deployment process by leveraging on familiar OpenShift APIs and tools that you will use for deployment on AWS, right? So ROSA allows you to go with a pay-as-you-go approach, right, with a 99.95% SLA, and the service is jointly supported by AWS as well as Red Hat. Now, ROSA makes it easier for you to focus on deploying your applications, and it accelerates your innovation by offloading the cluster lifecycle management heavy lifting, right, to Red Hat and AWS. Right, so you can just focus on running your applications on your existing OpenShift workflows and reducing the complexity of management. So at this point, I think ROSA still sounds a little bit similar to EKS. I mean, it's still Kubernetes based, right? So how is it actually different, right? So the difference is specifically in OpenShift itself, right? It's not just a container orchestration platform. It is a full-blown application platform experience out of box. It includes cluster services like monitoring, managing, and updating your cluster. It has platform services like CI/CD pipelines. It has centralized logging. It includes application services like databases or language runtimes and many other features, right? These are all pre-built and pre-integrated into OpenShift itself, and it's available right out of the box, right? And you can of course customize it and bring your own tooling separately. That's an option that you can have, right? So on top of OpenShift, ROSA is actually managed jointly by AWS and Red Hat engineers in order to deliver the performance and reliability and offload that cluster management responsibility from you, right? So you can focus on just deploying your application. So containers, right? We've sort of spoken about a few flavors. We want to help you make a decision, right? When you would utilize containers, right? Specifically when you have very predictable high traffic usage, right? So very high load, very high sustained load. That's when you want to choose containers. Another thing to highlight is if your application is non-HTTPS, HTTP or HTTPS listener, so you're using maybe TCP with your own custom payload, right? That will be a reason to use containers. If your application is stateful, right, you need to manage your state between API calls. I think that would be a very good reason to use containers as well. And or you're using specialized hardware, maybe you need GPUs in there for some processing requirements, then again, that's a very good reason to use containers. Probably the most important reason is actually hybrid scenarios when you're building an application that you don't know where you're going to deploy yet. You might need to deploy into the cloud, but you might also want to deploy into on-premise, and you need to retain that portability, right? Again, that will be a very, very good reason to choose containers as a baseline for doing your modernization work. Right. So that sort of rounds up containers a little bit. We'll go into serverless and we'll try and describe the differences, right? So we're trying to define serverless a little bit, right? So serverless is basically a set of services or even an architectural pattern, right, concept to actually help you to build and run applications and services without having to manage infrastructure, right? So what does it's not magic, right? What does your application actually run on? So of course, it still runs on servers, right? So the key thing here is AWS abstracts that away from you again, and server management and allocation and it's all done by AWS and is managed by AWS and is completely transparent to the user, right? So what are the immediate benefits that you gain from going serverless, right? Of course, no server management, right? Your developers don't have to worry about networking, sizing, patching, and monitoring servers. All that is handled over to AWS. You gain automatic, flexible, automated scaling, right? So once you deploy your application code, AWS becomes responsible for allocating compute resources to run your code anytime somebody tries to invoke your code, right? So we take care of that. You also gain high availability. So instead of having to deploy multiple servers in multiple AZs, one single deployment into a serverless service, right, ensures reliability, right? So AWS ensures that when your function is invoked, it remains available. A compute resource is backed up to be able to run your request, even if one of our AZs is down, right? So we'll run your code in another AZ within the region that you've deployed into. You gain access to various native integrations to AWS services. We facilitate that in order to drive innovation and drive the speed of delivery. So you don't need to do the nitty-gritty integration work, right? So that integration has been done for you straight into Lambdas. So some organizations have taken the decision to not just go cloud first, right? They've chosen to go serverless first, right? Opting to use serverless technologies in their applications as a first choice. So when we talk serverless, right, very often our customers think that, oh, serverless is Lambda functions, right? But actually, yes, that's predominantly true. But actually, there are serverless services throughout all layers of the stack, right? Compute, data stores, and integration. Sure, Lambda is the integration point and offers many key advantages for our customers, right? But it's really when you start to bring in other components, right, around Lambda and stitch them together using messaging, events, orchestration, and put storage and serverless compute behind it together, right, that you start to see really, really big benefits and gains. Right. So there are two key concepts in building serverless technology, serverless applications, right? And those are the first of which is actually microservices via APIs, right? So we see that a lot of customers have started to build very loosely coupled, modular, independently deployable APIs, right, using some of our serverless services and using Lambdas to build in their business logics, right, which is the customer customized portion, right? And that is the reason why AWS is so focused on delivering more integrations with Lambda and with EventBridge and with API Gateway and step functions, right, to allow our customers to very easily build new applications and functionality, right, using these loosely coupled components and stringing them together with Lambda code, right? And I want you to keep microservices in mind as we dig into some of the other components. We'll talk about microservices a little bit later as well. It's a pretty important concept. The second concept of serverless technologies is actually event-driven architecture, right? Using events as the connective tissue for modern applications, right? So what is an event, right? An event could be maybe your customers putting an item into your shopping cart, right? That could trigger an event. Or maybe a change in status in a support ticket, right? That could also be an event that would trigger an action. Right. So event-driven architectures improve scalability and fault tolerance, right, and agility by reducing dependencies. So that's the key concept, right? So how does it actually do it, right? So event-driven architectures use event routers, right, to abstract away producers from consumers, right? So an event producer like shopping cart event, right, doesn't need to know downstream who is going to consume that event. Similarly, consumers of the event, right? When I consume a shopping cart event to do some processing, I don't need to know upstream who is the producer of the event, right? So they simply interact with event routers, and at AWS it is EventBridge and SNS, right? Simple notification service that can serve that role, right? Now, events should also be handled asynchronously, right? So the concept is that one action doesn't need to wait for the outcome of another in order to continue processing, right? So this concept built into your application is very powerful, and it improves resilience and it reduces dependencies of your applications of your services to each other, right? So this improves the speed and the experience to the customer as well. last concept here is actually on using event stores as buffers, right? So event stores help to hold on to events as they come in and queue them up, so that when your consumer or your business logic is ready to process them, it can simply extract the events from the queue to do processing without having to wait, respond immediately, right, for upstream events to be triggered. Right? So this again improves the resiliency and the reliability of your services. Right? So these two concepts all involve some sort of building and some sort of change, right? So you might ask, how would I build Lambda functions, right? So you'll be happy to know that Lambda functions support many of the popular programming languages that you see on screen here: Java, C#, scripting languages like PowerShell and Node.js. These are all supported. Python, Go, Ruby, right? You would build these applications directly on the AWS Management Console, right? You can build some of the functions there. You could use Cloud9, right? Our cloud-based IDE service, right? You could also even integrate to your existing IDEs and your existing development workflows, right? To things like Eclipse and Visual Studio Code, right? So these are some of the IDEs that are also supported, right? Your developers would be able to use those existing skill sets to build serverless services. So the key point here we're trying to communicate is the skill sets of your current teams, right, could be portable with a little bit of retraining and helping them to understand what Lambda's functions are and how to build them. And they could reuse their skill sets in some of these programming languages, right, to build on serverless technologies. Now, similarly, we want to address when to go serverless, right? It's when your application needs to trigger an action on an event. So that's a very good reason. When you have varying utilization or you're not certain of the demand, right, you might have spikes. So those are very good reasons to use serverless technologies. Or when your application is a web application or API backend that's lighter weight, right? So it helps when you want to focus purely on building business logic and not have to worry about IT operations. When you want to build an API backend or a mobile application backend, those are very good reasons to use serverless technologies. And generally, when you want to reduce complexity and not handle the complexities of operations. Right. So after we've spoken about containers and serverless, right, we tied it up with a little bit of microservices, and that addresses how to modernize, how you would go about it. So remember this slide from earlier, right? We saw what a modern 3-tier application looks like. So we're going to try and transform this and move towards a modern 3-tier application, right? So in order to do that, we need to understand microservices, right? So we're trying to build minimal, stateless, reusable services, right, that can be deployed independently. So each microservice has its own sort of tech stack, right? You can decide what kind of technologies you're going to build it on with its own specialized data store, specifically customized for that particular type of that particular microservice. So in the process of implementing microservice, right, you're actually uncovering some of the technology debt or the legacy technologies that you have, right? And this is a good chance to sort of move away from proprietary license technology, adopt open source technologies that allow you to reduce your cost, right? And it's also a good chance to also implement DevOps principles, right, to do automated testing, automated setup, deployment, and sort of push your development team and your developers, right, to move towards owning that production support. So this is loosely what we call DevOps principles, right? So if you're building a net new application, then that's all that I've spoken about currently. These are all decision points. They're all fine and good, right? But if you have legacy applications, if you have applications that you're currently already supporting, then you need to think about what do I do right now, right? Do I rebuild my application wholesale or do I refactor? Right. So rebuilding is typically a very big effort, right? And it takes on a significant amount of risk investment, right? You're building in parallel. You eventually need to roll out this whole new system to replace the old system. A lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk going on in there, right? Then, so I think that sort of is the reason why customers always think that moving to microservices is a very daunting task, right? So enter the strangler pattern that we have on screen here, right? It's what we see as an approach, right? That customers have been using to transition to microservices using a refactoring approach, right? So the pattern basically keeps the monolith running. So your main application can stay while you do incremental development efforts, right? Building new microservices to replace old functionality. When your new microservices are commissioned and you've redirected traffic to the new microservices, that's when your old service or your old code is actually starting to get strangled and eventually can get removed from production. Right? So hence the strangler pattern. So this pattern really helps to reduce risk, and it really helps to reduce the time to value, right? Of realizing the value of your development efforts and this modernization effort. Right? So up till now, we've sort of been talking about these technologies in silos, right? We talk about containers, we talk about serverless and when to use containers, when to use serverless technologies. But here's the thought, right? Microservices, I mentioned earlier, each individual microservice, the tech stack is sort of independent to each other, right? So you can decide on them independently. So it is conceivable that you could build a serverless backend with Lambdas for one microservice in your application, and then choose a container backend, right? Maybe because this particular service needs to be very high performant, then you would choose containers to back up this microservice, right? And what we're trying to communicate here is you need to pick the right tool for the job, right? And that's where the importance of AWS's breadth and depth of service enters the fray, right? It's about having the choice when you need it, and having the right tool on hand to perform that job. So all that is actually trying to shift from that original pattern of that three-tier architecture, right, to this new pattern, right? This new pattern of also a three-tier architecture, but it's comprised of loosely coupled, asynchronous, event-driven microservices, right, that are all powered off custom-built perform specific databases that are tailored to that microservice and running on AWS managed compute options, right? Whether is it containers or is it serverless, right? So this is what we're trying to push towards. So all right, that's a good break time, right, to cut into a quiz question. Yujie, you ready?
Yep. Okay, I'm back again. So I realized more people have joined the call. So just to reiterate again the instructions. So later I'll flash the questions and the multiple choice answers. Then don't raise your hands first. I'll count down 3, 2, 1. Then you raise your hands. And the first person who raised his or her hand will unmute and you just answer the question. Okay? So the question is, which of these AWS services is part of the serverless family? Okay. So we have 4 options: EC2, AWS Fargate, EKS, and Lambda. And just a little hint, it can be more than one option, right? So, okay, 3. Okay, don't raise hand first. Wait, I lower everybody's hands. Wait for the countdown.
Everybody's excited.
Yeah. Wait for the countdown. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Paul. Okay. Paul, could you unmute yourself?
Oh, hello.
Yep, can hear
Can
you.
you
Hi,
hear?
Paul.
Hi,
Yes, we can hear
morning. Morning, everyone. Yeah, thanks for the insightful sharing. Would be Fargate and Lambda.
Yep, absolutely
Awesome.
correct. Awesome. Yep, thank you, Paul. Yeah, I'll just reach out to you via the message again for your email address. Yep.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for
Okay.
everyone's participation and the enthusiasm with raising hands. Okay,
Thanks, Paul.
so I think I'll pass the time over to Jeff, right, for the next segment. Jeff, please.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Hi, Jeff. Good morning. Thanks for coming
Good
in.
morning. You're very welcome. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Doherty. I'm the Business Value Program Lead for APJ as part of the Cloud Economics team. My colleagues and I help work with customers to justify the cost of a cloud migration. And we do that through the form of what we call a business case. If you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. And so, before I get into the details of what goes into a business case, what is a business case and why is it important? If you could just back up real quick, Dennis, thanks. So a business case is a baseline, right? And it really describes the cost of operating as is, or the do nothing scenario versus the cost of operating your infrastructure in the AWS environment. And it also describes the art of the possible commercially. it surfaces and makes visible to you other areas of potential business value that you can realize as a result of moving to the cloud. So that's what a business case is and why it's important. But how do we go about building a business case? Next slide, please. It's really an iterative and collaborative process with you, the customer. And we look at various elements here you see on the slide. First, it consists of discovery. So we're going to want to understand your current on-premises environment. How many servers, which ones are production or non-production, virtualized versus non, your utilization and uptime per server, and related storage and networking that makes up your current estate. And we can discover that in a number of ways. We can work with you and you can send that information to us manually. More often, we install a collector, data collector, such as third-party collectors such as Cloudamize or CloudChomp. We also have an AWS discovery tool called Migration Evaluator. And so we can use a combination of those methods to really get a deep understanding of those attributes into your current estate. It's also important in this discovery to understand what your current operating costs are. And here, again, sometimes the customers will provide us the costs of running their current estate. Many times, though, customers don't have a full and complete picture of what their on-premises operating costs really are. So in those cases, we bring in a set of benchmarks that we update frequently after working with thousands of customers throughout the APJ region, and modified for your specific region. So for example, the region for customers operating in Indonesia, costs would be different from those in Singapore, and those are updated frequently. And oftentimes where we find customers don't fully understand their costs or miss those are in the areas of things like space, rent, power, and cooling, because usually those costs are allocated in some form, and they're definitely hitting your organization. So once we've accumulated all this information from you via the various tools, and we're working with you to fill in any gaps we might have, then we go into the process of IT landscape mapping. In other words, how would we map your current instances and environment to the AWS environment? And here's where we would find opportunities to right size. If some of your servers are only being utilized a certain number of hours a day or days per week, we could right size those into a lower instance or fewer instances, or even turn some of your instances off. Sometimes we find customers are paying for a lot more storage than they actually need based on their utilization. So we find those opportunities to map what a future state would look like on AWS. And then the associated costs. So we will provide and identify, based on that AWS instance mapping and environment, what your anticipated AWS costs would be to operate a similar utilization and environment on AWS. I already covered the costs. So that will start to give us a picture of your current run costs and current operating costs versus what the cost would be to run on AWS. But that's not the end of the story. It's really also important to incorporate what are the costs of change and the migration approach. So we will incorporate into our directional business cases an estimate for what it would take to migrate, the length of time, but also those costs. We'll also include, and this is really important, the dual run costs. We fully understand and expect, depending on the time it takes to migrate, that you'll need to continue to operate your on-premises environment for some period of time. So as you start to migrate some of your servers over to AWS, you'll still be running some portion of your estate on premises until you fully migrate. So we incorporate an estimate of your parallel run costs into that estimate. So that will give you a complete picture of that eventual in-state business case, which again would be really a comparison of costs of running on premises versus AWS, including indicative run costs, and would often include an NPV analysis and ROI. Next slide, please. So how do we identify sources of value? Well, working with customers throughout the years, we developed something called the Cloud Value Framework. And it consists of 4 key business value pillars. The first pillar is we call cost savings, or TCO. And that really is what I really just described to you, is the cost savings or cost avoidance for moving to the cloud. We conduct regular surveys with our customers who tell us and report back the actual cost that they've actually realized after migrating to the cloud. And so these that you see here on the screen are just a few samples of customer reported actual realized benefits. These are benchmarks. And so what we found, customers are telling us that the TCO savings of shifting from on-premises to the cloud, they've realized between a 27 and 42% savings, cost savings, ongoing annually for moving to the cloud. We also have 3 other very important pillars: staff productivity, and this is the efficiency of reducing the tasks that your IT infrastructure personnel need to do on a day-to-day basis by keeping the lights on in an on-premises environment. So they no longer have to do those day-to-day tasks because now it's covered in the cloud. And what we found customers are telling us through these benchmark surveys is that organizations have realized between a 50 and 70% improvement in IT admin efficiency. Operational resilience is the benefit of improving your internal SLAs and reducing unplanned outages, but also helping avoid security breaches. Here's one example of a KPI that we've measured in our benchmarking survey for resilience, which is customers tell us they've achieved a 20 to 30% reduction in monthly critical incidents as a result of moving to the cloud. And finally, we have business agility, or the ability to deploy applications faster and reduce errors. And this is really powerful because in an on-premises environment, if you're in a test environment, the server's up. Whereas in the cloud, you can spin up and spin down and not have to pay for those past your testing and development phase. And it's also just a much faster and highly more agile environment to develop apps. So our enterprises like you can get these products out to market faster and code faster. So that's at a high level, but let's dig into these a little bit more. Next slide, please. So cost savings, again, this is the TCO savings of your infrastructure savings of moving from on-premises to cloud through right sizing, optimization, and so forth. And I referenced the customer survey. And on the left, you see that the average reduction in overall spend per user that our customers are telling us they've realized is over 24%. However, what we've also found through the benchmarking survey, our customers are telling us that the bigger the customer, the more applications and users they have, the greater the savings. So that reduction in overall spend per user for large and mature enterprises operating at scale is actually over 42%. Next slide, please. So let's dig into a little bit more about staff productivity. Again, this is the efficiency improvement by function on a task-by-task basis. Next slide, please. Again, these are some results from our customer benchmarking survey where customers tell us after they've migrated what benefits they've actually realized from moving to the cloud. And you can see here just 2 KPIs that we asked and measured. The number of VMs managed per admin increased by nearly 58%. And the increase in terabytes managed per admin increased by nearly 68%. Now, oftentimes our customers will take these efficiency benefits and deploy their internal staff to do more strategic work rather than, again, that keeping the lights on work. Next slide, please. And again, we see a similar scaling effect where with large organizations which have been re-architected, those savings potential and the efficiency potential gains even more steam. You see a more than 140% increase in VMs managed per admin in a re-architected environment, and similar gains in terabytes managed per admin. Next slide, please. So let's dig a little bit deeper into operational resilience. So again, here are some KPIs that we measured and asked in our customer survey. These are the average benefits our customers are telling us they realized through operational resilience. So more than a 56% decrease in downtime, more than a 24% decrease in monthly incidences, and a more than 31% decrease in critical incidents. And once they have any incidences, they're also finding that they can decrease the time to resolve those incidents by nearly 40%. So, obviously other benefits that aren't captured here, I don't need to tell you the cost of downtime. They can be extremely costly, and to the extent moving to the cloud can reduce any downtime incidences, can save you some real money. Let's move on to the next one. Finally, business agility, or the ability to deploy your applications faster and with more agility. And again, as I mentioned before, there's a couple aspects to this. I mentioned the decrease in time for you to get your applications out to market, nearly a 38% decrease in time to get your apps out to market, time to deploy production, nearly 40%, and an increase in code deployment frequency. The other thing I mentioned is there's cost savings here too that are captured in the TCO savings, because you can really spin up and down in a test environment and not have to continue to pay for an instance when you no longer need it in a test environment. So the really exciting thing is most of our business cases, directional business cases, focus on the TCO cost of, in other words, the cost comparison of moving your infrastructure and operating your infrastructure on premises to the cloud. But what we found is that from our customers, but also this IDC study points to, whereas there's significant savings potential, I think I referenced earlier, nearly 25% TCO cost reduction, that only represents a very small piece of the pie, 8% of potential business value. Much of the other business value benefits come in these other sections that I went through: resilience, agility, and productivity. In fact, 47% of potential business value benefits that organizations can realize come in the productivity area. And again, those benefits can be realized in a number of ways through the ability to avoid additional staff hires or redeploying that staff into more strategic initiatives that you want to pursue. So again, this is the referencing an IDC study that talks about this. Okay, next slide. So, I touched on this a little bit earlier. Why is a business case important? And I called it, an important baseline to understand current and future costs and the variables to those costs should they change. But it's also a great artifact to remove friction, right? It's a non-emotional portrayal of before and after costs, and gives you a holistic view of the cost of adoption and migration as you move. Next slide, please. It also helps plan for your future workload and application development. And you can sort of think of it as a compass. It's an artifact that you can use after you migrate to help plan where you want to go next, whether you want to migrate additional workloads to the cloud, or whether you want to move towards modernizing, as my colleague Dennis really went into depth on. And so it's a great artifact to use either before and after your migration to continue optimizing your environment to achieve the best business outcomes and financial outcomes for your organization. Okay, last slide. This sort of brings it all together in a modernization theme, as you've been listening to. So the TCO benefits, the other benefits benchmarks that I described to you, really come into play in this first section here on the left. You're in your on-premises environment, lift and shift to the cloud, and instance right sizing, and even improved elasticity. Those are the benefits that our customers have realized through real cost savings and agility and other benefits. But as you move down the cloud maturity curve, you continue to see costs go down and potential business value benefits go up. So as you move down the maturity scale and past improved elasticity, we actually have teams and resources to help you put into place good cloud financial management practices where you can continue to measure and monitor your utilization to ensure you're on the right savings plan, to ensure you're on the right instance, referencing here choosing the correct pricing model. It's a dynamic relationship where we're with you along the way after migration through our cloud financial management team that will help you save money on your utilization of AWS. Perhaps there's opportunities in this next bar for storage optimization. Maybe through an analysis and speaking with you, we realized a portion of your storage can move into one of our long-term, lower-cost storage options like Glacier, for example. And then the benefits keep going once you move into a modernization pathway such as serverless, containers, and managed service into an AWS optimized environment. Well, great. That's what I had for you today. I think there's some questions. You want to keep those at the end, team?
Yes, thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome. Well, with that, I'm going to hand my time back to YJ for the quiz.
Yep. Thank you, Jeff, so much for the
very
presentation.
much.
So yeah,
You're welcome.
back to the last question for the quiz segment, right? So the last question would be, besides cost savings, which of the following are key pillars of the cloud value framework? So hint again, it will be it's likely to be more than one option, right? So the first option you have is time to market, second, staff productivity, third option, user friendliness, and last option, business agility, right? So with the countdown of from 3, 2, 1, you can start to raise your hands. So 3, 2, 1. Okay. Dennis, could you see who's the first? I think I couldn't. Is there some bug on my end?
Was it Kenny?
Kenny? Oh, okay.
Was
Kenny. Kenny, let me see. Okay. Yeah, I see it too, Kenny. Kenny, could you unmute yourself, please?
B and D. Staff
Sorry?
productivity,
Yeah.
staff productivity and business agility.
Yep, absolutely correct. Okay, thank you so much, Kenny. Yeah, so Kenny, I'll just reach out to you via message as well. And for everyone else, this is not the last chance for you to win prizes from us. We also have in our survey form, right, where we mentioned the spotting of techies. I hope you have been keeping a lookout for our techies throughout the presentation. So if you input the correct number of techies in the survey form at the end, right, you will stand to win some Amazon vouchers from us as well. Okay, so handing the time over back to Manoj.
Thank you, Yutie. So our next speaker for today is Mr. NUX Lien from Simple Solution System. NUX is also the EXCO member of the Singapore Enterprise chapter in SG Tech. We'll be sharing with you on the benefits of being a partner with AWS. NUX, over to you.
Thanks, Manoj. All right. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. So my purpose here today is coming more on the real life perspective. I think a lot of us, in this room, being developers, being consumers, I think we also, hear the thing about principals always sell the dream, but we on the ground are the ones who have to deliver the nightmare. So that's, the thing here is, so how do I bring about this dimension? All right. So, I wanted to come and share with you, all right, us being partners with AWS for the last 3 years, all right, what have we gained? What have we learned? All right. And also I'd like to share with you, all right, how we actually overcome the challenges and how really AWS has actually helped us. So being a application development house for the last 20 years, all right, so these are kind of few things that we've actually started to see over the years, all right, when the cloud started being popular. All right, so one of the key things was infrastructure. Like I mentioned, we are app vendors. We don't like hardware. Really, we don't like hardware. All right. But the thing here is that we've always had to build our solutions on hardware. All right. And we were really spending a lot of time, setting up development environments in our own offices, trying to, I'm not too sure whether you guys remember the good old days where even encryption, I remember when we first started on encryption, we needed things like a RSA add-on card onto the server. Right? These were all very, I would say, I'll call them nuances, which AWS, right, wants to address. Right? So one of the key things was challenges in infrastructure. We were really spending too much time on it. All right, we couldn't focus on what mattered most, the application. All right, and the thing here is also scaling and virtualization. One thing that Dennis mentioned earlier in one of his slides was, in the past, we always had to do hardware sizing, etc. The thing here is that even if we did our hardware sizing, right? I mean, of course, this being a good problem, right? If the business did very well, the problem here is that even sizing could go wrong. Projections could also be wrong because they were just estimations. So even in the past, if we did infrastructure sizing, right, whatever we projected, right, chances are they weren't actually as accurate or as optimal as we want to be. So we really need to, how do I say this, address these concerns. Next slide, please. So the other slide was, of course, at our end, all right, on the development. First thing is we were spending too much time also doing deployment, all right, and this also posed a security risk. One of the key things here is that being a business owner, all right, one of the things here is that you want to secure your environment. So the one thing here was, how do I prevent people from not logging in onto the servers to deploy codes, or at least reduce the number of logging into servers? Because those were anyone with administrative access, right, that they pose the biggest so-called risk as well. I mean, not to say I don't trust the team, or you don't trust your team, but everything is a risk. All right. So one of the key thing was security. Second part here is also the coding methodologies. All right, because now instead of the old waterfall SDLC method, right, our customers want agile. So every 2 weeks or 3 weeks during each sprint, they want to be able to see something. But if we did it the old way, we didn't have time. We will be spending too much time doing deployment. We won't be doing enough time to do application development. All right, we won't be able to allow our customers or our team members to see the works that have been done. All right, so even project managers couldn't estimate, couldn't determine, all right, how well the project was progressing into. All right, so we really needed virtualized solutions and collaborative environments, all right, to help us support all these automations. Next slide, please. So, being wise people, what did we do? All right, so we actually went to Google. All right, we went to Google, and I found this very, very good answer. All right, from Wikipedia, another great wise solution. All right, and really cloud native. All right, we really wanted to look at how we could come up with solutions that allowed us. The problem with software as a service at many times is they were already the end product. We couldn't do customizations straight up. I mean, there were low code development platforms, etc., but those are just one, and they also had their limitations. So we wanted to look into solutions, right? We could build ourselves, but we also leverage on the cloud versus on subscriptions. So going cloud native was actually really second nature, all right, with the microservices, with Docker containers, and also orchestrators, all right, to help us deliver solutions for our customers, all right, efficiently and effectively. Next slide, please. So one of the key things, all right, when we went into cloud development was, first, we actually noticed faster development time. All right, it complements Agile very, very nicely. All right, and amazingly, it's quite compatible. All right, because yeah, we could do a lot of what we used to do. Like Dennis also shared earlier. All right, most of the because of the cloud native languages like C#, Java, JS, Node, etc. All right, yes, there's a bit of a training, yes, no doubt about it, but in technology, there's always uplifting that needs to be done. All right, but it was very compatible. All right, and like I mentioned earlier, security out of the box, and of course, the maintainability. That was the biggest intangible benefit that most of us benefited from. Next slide, please. So as a development team, all right, we started to see some of these benefits when we started to implement things like infrastructure as a code. All right, instead of going to the consoles, trying to click buttons here and there, all right, IAC allowed us to just deploy and deliver very similar solutions, just change a bit of configuration here and there, and then after that we could just deploy it successfully. All right, we didn't have to worry about environment limitations. All right, and our developers still worked on their native IDEs. All right, it could be Eclipse, it could be Visual Studio. It still complements their work. All right, and they didn't have to worry about where the server was, this and that. Just push and go. Additionally, of course, when we looked at serverless, of course, we had some limitations like not being able to do batch jobs or do some custom scripting within the server. But then, of course, there are services like Lambda, Steps, right, that gave us the flexibility to address these limitations. And with all these benefits, of course, it definitely gave us more time to innovate and also be operationally more efficient. Next slide, please. right? So from our customer's point of view, all right, these were some of the key things as well. All right, when they look at it, servers, oh, so no servers, nothing to maintain. Gone are the days of Microsoft Tuesday patches. All right, that was one of the biggest headaches because, as developers, we dreaded Tuesdays because when the patch came out, we had to see whether there was any compatibility concerns. All right, everything is subscription driven. All right, so even in infrastructure environment, one of the biggest concern last time was that when the project went end of life, right, and it shut down, they still need to find a way to dispose the servers. All right, disposing of hard disks, disposing of RAM chips, etc., in a secured manner. With subscription, that's all taken care of. All right, and also the flexibility, all right, of the infrastructures, all right, of the cloud. Procurement was on the fly, and upgrades and patches are all handled by the cloud. All right, next slide, please. So Progress actually shared with me this slide, and I thought it was very, very useful. All right, in the past, I'm not too sure whether most of you all actually had this concern, but especially in the big MNCs and large organizations, you always had the IT department and you always had the business user department. The problem with these two departments was they never talked to each other, or they were always very siloed and they were never cohesive together. But one of the things that when we started moving towards the cloud, right, especially doing on cloud native, right, it actually helped to unite IT with our business users because they stopped having to do more all the nuances and rather focus on the technology, all right? Because now they don't have to worry about server maintenance, they don't have to worry about patches, they don't have to worry about all these things, all right? And they weren't on 24/7 standby. So these were one of the intangible benefits whereby it really helped to unite IT, right, together with the business users, all right, and it really empowered our users, all right, to actually move forward to technology. Next slide, please. So just looking at how we've actually implemented it, all right, in the past, I think I shared this slide in the previous webinar, but just want to rehash it. All right, so using automated tools, all right, by the time, all right, the developer finishes his work, all right, going all the way to the production environment, all right, it's all automated, all right. So you can see, it allows us to really, put more effort into the application. Next slide, please. So with regards to automation, all right, so these are some of the tools, all right, that when you look into a continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD, all right, you have your repository, your source code verification, validation, your artifacts repository, all right, and then of course using an orchestrator to orchestrate the entire process all the way up from the developers code repository to the production servers, all right? And you can even actually start to slowly build more automated testings. You could insert multiple kind of testings. It could be performance tests, it could be security source code review tests, it could be user business tests, all right, using Selenium or robots, all right, to actually help to simulate. And what happens here is that as a developer, I could just run it through this pipe, I could actually see the results, and I could see where my code went wrong. Next slide, please. All right, so I just wanted to share some case studies, with you guys. Okay, so at Simsys, we do two mainly big types of projects. One of them, of course, is the application-driven one. The other one is the websites. So when doing, all right, website projects, especially we do quite a number of the government websites and also large websites where there's actually a big amount of content. All right. Now we're not looking at like 30-page websites or 50-page websites. We're looking at websites with 1,500 to 3,000 pages of content. So the challenge in this project, all right, what this project actually entailed was the Singapore government. We've all heard of the family courts, the state courts, and the Supreme Court. So the concept of this website was that because people didn't know about these three courts, or at least they didn't know how to approach them. All right, people only know I have a problem. How do I solve it? All right, and the problem here was having family courts, state courts, and Supreme Court was very siloed, and people couldn't address their concerns. So Supreme Court wanted to address this problem, and they curated this website. This was an amalgamation of the three websites. It allowed people to come here, right, and then focus, right. And we realized there were three key pillars. All right, it could be either a criminal case, a civil case, all right, or a community case. So these were the few things that we actually focused on. So we delved in straight into the topic focus. But what was the technology behind this, and how did AWS and other cloud platforms, benefited us? All right, so it was not really in the application development level, but in a project like this, right, with 1,500, 2,000 pages of content, and the content had to be rewritten. So we actually had to come up with automated processes, right, on the cloud to actually help us focus, right, and work and coordinate with the content writers, right, to synchronize and push the content right onto the website, immediately without having to go through all those migration processes. The other part that we actually benefited on, right, on the cloud was actually the search, right? Yes, the previous methodology or some of my legacy developers were used to say, well, search very easy, I can just put it in the search template, right? And then just put it, code up a page, a search page, and I'll just crawl the database and then be able to find it. But I was talking to them and we were also thinking about it, but because content is very dynamic, content keeps changing all the time, text changes. So if we hard coded the search template, right, we weren't able, right, to catch up with the search, right, with our users properly. So the thing here was elastic containers, all right, search containers or search services, right, that allow us to actually modify search parameters, right, or within the search engine itself. So rather than use search templates and hard-coded templates to actually find, to help in the search, right, we actually use, a search service, all right, to actually dynamically. And so what happened here is we needed a very robust and a very scalable search service. And that's where, your search containers come in and benefit, heavily. Next slide, please. So another project that we actually did on AWS is actually on with the Ministry of Manpower. All right, and with this project, it was fully, it was fully serverless. So we didn't even have an EC2, all right, or Windows Server. All right, everything was on a container. All right, and we actually built it on a container. All right, even the database as well. All right, so we would really one of the things that the customer posed to us a challenge was he didn't want to do maintenance. All right, or at least he wanted to be as the lowest maintenance as possible. Upgrades and patches were really something that a lot of the nuances that they really wanted to get rid of, right? And so, with this project, right, the way it worked, right, was it allowed us, all right, to dynamically, and also the other portion was because with Ministry of Manpower, there were a lot of backend interfaces that we had to, all right, so using AWS APIs, right, really helped us interface securely, right, with a lot of these requirements. All right, with this, next slide, please. Yep.
Thanks,
so
Enerex.
with this, I'm going to hand hand the deck back to Dennis. Dennis, thank you so much.
Thanks, Enerex. So I'd just like to share one slide, right, in closing. Right, so I think we want to talk a little bit more about the AWS Partner Network, right? So it's basically a sort of a global community of partners, and this is how AWS interacts with our partners, right? To offer this APN program where our partners can come in and leverage our programs, our expertise and resources, right, to help to build, market, and then sell offerings to your customers, right? It's a pretty diverse network. I think 100,000 partners and counting, over 150 countries all around the world. But myself, I'm a partner development manager that builds on the APN. We work with our APN partners and reach out to them to actually help them to address some of the issues and help them to onboard to AWS and offer our capability and help. Right, so myself and as well as my technical team will be on hand to consult with you to understand your problem and help you to move forward on the cloud. Right. So some of the other benefits on APN is it's free to register. Naturally, the link is the QR code is on the screen and the link as well, and you can access discounted training. There's some free online training on the portal as well that you can access. There's a lot of partner resources in there. There's and marketing capability as well, right? So just touch on a few. So do reach out to your AWS representative or your partner manager. You can drop me an email if you're keen to talk a little bit more. My email's on screen, right? So that's all I have today, right? So next up, I think I'll hand the time back to Gunan to take us through any Q&A that might be present.
Hey, thanks, Dennis. So I think I'm actually mindful of time. From the question that actually came up in the chat, Most of them actually have been answered regarding premium support, etc. With respect to the content, Manoj, would you share how the content will be shared?
Maybe Dennis, you would like to answer this? Will the slides be made available? Because the recording of this will be made available on our website. So you can always refer to recording.
Okay.
As for the slides, Dennis.
Sure. I think we have no issues. We can package up the slides as a PDF. We'll share it with SGTech. Then maybe we'll trouble SGTech to then share it to the participants.
Sure, that will not be a problem.
All right. I think we've got time for one other question. So maybe Dennis, I'll take the question to you. Maybe
Sure.
can you share with us how, I mean, both you and Anurag talked about Singapore government, MOM, etc. Maybe you can talk through how some of our public sector customers in Singapore are modernizing the applications.
Sure. I can speak a bit about that, I guess. So I think generally speaking, right, not specific, right? I think the whole public sector is still trying to address GovTech's migration deadlines, right, that have been called out. I think it's Q3 2023, if I'm not wrong, right? For a lot of the eligible on-premise systems, right, to move to the government commercial cloud, right? So I think recently GovTech had a StackX event where they announced that they are publishing version 2.0 of GCC, right? So I think a lot of these migration efforts are now gaining velocity, and there's a bit more clear that they need to move to GCC 2.0 by 2023, right? So that sort of gels back to what I spoke about earlier, right? Where that migration, that cloud journey, right, where customers are moving, they are doing migration work. So I think this will happen for the next 12 months, perhaps 18 months, perhaps migration work will be the core focus. But then after that, right, modernization will come very squarely into the picture, right? Because all these legacy applications are now sitting on EC2s on the cloud and are just waiting to be modernized. So I think there's probably a lot of business there to be done. So I think that's what this webinar is sort of about as well. Trying to push and trying to educate, right, the industry that, hey, you need to start to look at how to modernize, learn how to containerize, move your applications and containerize them, learn about serverless technologies, learn about how you will build on serverless technologies, because we feel that the next wave in demand will be for serverless applications. I want you to be able to containerize and deploy on Kubernetes. We have an OpenShift capability. I want you to be able to deploy into my OpenShift clusters, right? So your applications will fall into that kind of a pattern rather than your traditional 3-tier, come in and tell me how many servers, how many VMs you need, and we'll give you the VMs and you set up kind of an approach, right? So I think that's the push that we're trying to do, and that's what we're trying to educate the industry about. Right?
Hey, thanks, Dennis. And thanks for talking about Red Hat, even though it wasn't planned. But
Yeah,
both Red Hat and AWS are working with a lot of government and non-government customers as well, right? To help
for
them
sure.
speed up how a customer can move onto ROSA, speed up their application development and deployment. So
Yep.
I think it's a great partnership as well. And this can definitely help those on the call. I think we've got a few more minutes. Maybe let's answer one question that actually came up on the chat, and then we can go to the survey itself. One of the questions that came out on the chat is actually from Yongfat and Yongfat Q, and he's asking about, is there any AWS services which are AR, VR related?
AR, VR related. Okay, so I think this is probably not AWS's strength specifically. We do have a service called Sumerian. It's a bit of an older service, but that's a bit more of like a VR type service. But having said that, we again, I lean on the partner network, right? So we have a very broad partner network. There are partners out there that are developing solutions that are running on AWS, not specifically an AWS service per se, it's a partner service, but their capability could very well sit on AWS and present AR and VR capabilities, right? So I won't go as far as to say that that's AWS's AR, VR capabilities, but I think those are certainly options.
All right. Okay, so maybe just mindful of time. We've got 3 more minutes. Would we be able to go to the next slide, Manoj?
Sure.
Thanks. Manoj, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you to the speakers, Dennis, Jeff, and Anurag and Guna for this insightful discussion and the presentation. Of course, we appreciate if you can give us your feedback on today's webinar. Your feedback is valuable to us at It will help us improve future webinars. Do remember there's also Amazon gift vouchers to be won. So simply scan the QR code on the screen to access the feedback form or type in the URL into the browser. I'll leave the slide on for the next few minutes.
Okay, thank you, Manoj. So we'll leave the slide on, right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
With that, I'd like to thank you all for joining today. Hope the session has been very fruitful to you. Please stay safe, and I hope to see you at future events. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks Dennis.
You.
Thanks, Gunan. Thanks, Manoj.
And Anurag.